Maika, my name is Dr. Mary Pellessier, and my official title is the Medical Director for Applied Research for the Institute for the Study of Peak States, so work with Dr. McFedrick. And I'd like to start off with, first of all, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Is it Maika?
It's Maika.
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 Maika. Yeah.
So, Maika, if you would just tell us a little bit about yourself, where do you live, just some little data like that. Just give us who are you?
Well, actually, right now I live in Hawaii, and I'm actually getting ready to move to Germany in a week. And so I have been involved in natural health and healing for about 35 years in a number of different capacities, as a body worker, healer, as a counselor. I do deep emotional healing work. And my interest in research in the last 35 years has really been on optimum health and the elevation of consciousness and transformation of human beings. So that's really been the gist of my research and interest in the last 35 years, looking at both the spiritual aspects of what it is to be a human being and studying the history of a lot of the different spiritual cultures and spiritual thoughts about our relationship to life and our spiritual understanding of life, and also the biological and scientific, anywhere from astrophysics and astronomy and biology and biochemistry and neurology. And a particular interest of mine over those years has been the brain, because in my research it's really been looking into what makes all this work together, and what integrates all this seems to be the human brain. And so from my own perspective and then my own experiences, I've had a lot of actually physical trauma, a lot of physical injury. So studying trauma and what is actually out there to understand what happens in the experience of trauma, from both emotional, physiological, and psychological aspects of that, to the healing possibilities of trauma. And so experiencing a lot of trauma myself, this was, of course, of peak interest to me.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating. I can see why you know Dr. McFedrick, I take it, or know of him, your research. So I'm wondering if you could tell us, Maika, what had happened. So you kind of talked about this trauma. So what had happened and what problems were you having before you met Karen?
Well, I actually had a number of different things happen. About 29 years ago, I broke my back. I crushed L1, which is the lumbar vertebrae, and did a lot of nerve damage. So it never really healed properly, and I've had a lot of different types of healing work done on it. Mm-hmm. And but ended up in a lot of nerve pain, a lot of scar tissue, which created nerve pain, digestive problems, all kinds of things. And but also I've had in my life probably about 7 or 8 really serious brain concussions. And about 11, 12 years ago, I had a fall where I fell just in front of my temporal bone, and that was probably about the 8th serious concussion I've had in my life. And after that injury, I lost a lot of function. I lost a lot of motor function. I couldn't, fatigue within just a few minutes of any type of physical movement. A lot of cognitive problems, memory. I lost a lot of memory, my ability to access short-term and long-term memory. A lot of difficulties focusing, concentrating. I noticed all of a sudden, a lot of sensitivity with my hearing. I lost taste. My eyesight started to have problems with my eyesight. But especially noticing was sound became excruciatingly painful.
So very sensitive to the sound.
Yeah, very, very sensitive, where it would give me a headache and make me extremely irritable. Mm-hmm. Definitely also noticed a lot of emotional mood swings, went into different aspects of depression. And I mean, it really caused a real change in my life and in my lifestyle.
And this was when was this last injury? Was how many years ago?
This was about, I guess, 12 years now.
12 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
And had you gotten any help for this or tried any sorts of had therapy along the way, or after this injury 12 years ago, which sounds like it's pretty significant? What had you done?
I really didn't reach out for any kind of medical help. I've studied a lot of the research on conventional medical models of brain injury, and especially because of what happened in the National Football League in the Americas, where a lot of the brain research was starting to understand the symptomology of multiple brain traumas.
Right.
And looking at all that research and studying what really they have to offer, it's basically nothing. They don't really have anything that seems to help brain injuries. And in fact, they have a hard time diagnosing it, with only diagnostics coming after you're dead, post-mortem, which wasn't really an option for me.
Yeah. Yes, I would, as a medical physician trained in the conventional model, I would totally agree with you. That there really isn't much. And I used to do disability exams for Social Security, and I think it was missed all the time. All the time. So totally agree.
Yeah.
Were you after this injury, were you in the hospital initially, or?
No, I don't really. I really haven't seen a doctor since I broke my back, which was 30 years ago, up to that point. Okay. Because again, I've studied extensively the history of the medical model going back hundreds of years, and know very well what the medical model is based on. And it's really based on what used to be called heroic medicine or drug medicine. And it really has nothing to do with actually making the body better.
And healing and health, yes.
Yeah, they treat symptomology with stuff that they're still experimenting with, which mostly is highly toxic side effects. So I'm not really interested in the medical model. I've done a lot of alternative work. Because of the brain injury, I was unable to work. So I didn't really have the funds to do very much. I did what I could for myself. I do take a lot of supplementation especially for regenerating nerve tissue. And I did have some cranial sacral work, which is a type of body work that actually helps to correct trauma in the body also. And it's really, go ahead.
So what I was going to ask is, so when you had that last significant traumatic brain injury 12 years ago, it sounds like your ability to function really dramatically dropped off with all the things you described. Am I understanding that correctly?
Dramatically is an understatement. Yeah, I mean, really, it really, my experience was that my life as I knew it was over. And I had to somehow be able to create a new life where I could function with my limited capabilities. Really, I mean, that's really what it came to.
Yeah. Maika, can you describe for us a little bit of what was that like? I mean, what was your life after that significant injury when you had such a decrease in function? I mean, were you basically in the house? Were you able to get out?
Well, what happened a short time after that is I actually moved to where I live in the Big Island now in Hawaii. I was living on Maui, and I was doing phone counseling at that time to generate income. And after the injury, I really couldn't do that anymore. And a friend of mine was living here in Big Island. I came to visit him, and I had enough savings to live for a couple of months without having to work. And then luckily, life here on the Big Island is a little different than what most people are used to. And there's a lot of people who come from the mainland USA and have residences here where they need people to care for them. So I was lucky enough to get a caretaking job to where I could work 2 or 3 hours at my own leisure to just upkeep the property.
Okay.
And that's really been what I've been doing for mostly the last 12 years. was very limited abilities to what I was doing, and did notice slowly but surely the brain was getting better, but it was a very slow process.
Okay.
Yeah, so that really, I live in Hawaii where the ocean is here. For the first 9 years, I really couldn't swim maybe 10 or 15 yards, 5 meters maybe, without complete fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't really able to enjoy where I was living and what I would like to do, because I'm usually pretty physically active,
Mm-hmm.
and have been most of my life.
Prior to the injury, yes.
Yeah, prior to the injury. And I mean, because I broke my back, I was, again, that was a kind of a compounding another factor, which interfered with my ability to really function very well physically.
Mm-hmm.
The brain injury really also made that much worse, and it also affected a lot of my cognitive function. For what I had known about the brain, for what I had studied about the brain, what I was familiar with, it was very interesting for me to study the process of brain injury from the inside, to be keenly aware that I couldn't access, like my brain wasn't able to access people's names that I knew, or things I was very familiar with, but I really couldn't recall that information, and was really aware that that was a brain function that was not working well.
Okay, so you had insight into that. Were you able to, could you still read?
I could read, yeah, I could read.
Were you able to retain the information, or would you just read and it wouldn't be?
Not definitely, that was a part of it. Not like I could retain it well.
Okay.
I could retain the essence of it, which is, again, difficult to describe. And I think one of the things about brain injury, which is mostly just completely misunderstood or cannot be understood, is what it's like to have a brain injury.
Mm-hmm.
Because you look normal.
Yes.
From all respects, you look fine. And when you talk, it seems like you're fine. But there was a lot of function. And the more I studied, again, because of the recent information on multiple brain injuries, there is, especially with sports figures who've committed suicide and things, I could really understand why they would go there. Like there's an internal psychological, emotional process that occurs that is, it's a devastating experience.
Mm-hmm. Was it like a sense of loss of yourself almost? Your self-identity?
That's a really good way of putting it. And I would also add to that it's really a loss of feeling what we consider, what most people overlook, of just being a normal human being, where you can function and laugh and do all these kinds of things. That's no longer there. And there's really not only a loss of self, but a distortion of self.
Interesting.
Which is a little different,
Yes.
It's really a distortion where emotionally I wasn't able to connect the same way. My own internal conflicting psychological, emotional processes were very disturbing in that process. And hence I can see why many people with multiple brain injuries either become violent towards themselves, violent towards other, or ultimately, like some of the high profile cases where they commit suicide. It's not so easy to understand what causes that kind of behavior, except that, when we talk about brain injury from an aspect of brain physiology or neurology, where the limbic system is damaged. Like I could feel emotionally there were just not connections happening. I could feel, there's an area in the brain, in the midbrain, called the thalamus hypothalamus that has certain functions. And I could feel that area had become damaged. I didn't know when I was hungry. I didn't know when I was thirsty. I know that from the brain injury, I did probably some vertebral problems in the neck, some cervical problems. And when I tracked those problems, a lot of it had to do with the vagus nerve, which comes out of the brain stem. And so a lot of digestive problems. So, I mean, it was just a multitude of different symptomology, you know, where I know if I went to a doctor, which I finally did, I went to a doctor because I looked into getting disability. Because I
Okay.
didn't feel I was able to work. I recently had a child and I needed an income. So I went to a medical doctor, and they wanted to do all these tests and MRIs and all these different things. And when I did that, and I realized that they will never find, they don't have the capacity in all their technology to really say, oh yes, you have damage in this part of your brain. You know, we'll wait till you die and then we can check it and see, but that's really all they really offer. So I was going to go that route. I went to a doctor a few times. He did some quick checks. He said, oh, you're fine. I could send you some specialists and I can do all this stuff. And I just said, you know, that's not interesting to me. And actually it was shortly after that that I found the peak states work.
Okay. Did they happen to do neuropsychological testing?
He was going to submit me for that. There is a specialist on one of the other islands that does that. And actually, I have a friend who had also brain injury and actually went to that specialist. And I can't say that I can make comments about what she felt about that individual, but it wasn't very inspiring that there would be offer any
Anything.
kind of, yeah. He basically put her on drugs, which then compounded her problems after a while. So
Right.
it wasn't an avenue that
Not a good one. Okay. Well, then why don't you go into how did you find Grant and the peak states work and finally Karen? Tell us that part of the story. And so far, this has been absolutely fascinating. And it's especially fascinating for me listening to you and having the background that you talked about. And in essence, knowing about these things. And then, as you said, having this severe trauma happen and learning about it from the inside out. It's a very interesting, your story. I'm fascinated by it. But continue on. Tell us about now, how did the next step? How did you meet Grant? How did you meet Karen?
Yep. Well, as I continued into my research, I was listening to some guy do an interview about this kind of instant healing thing that he does. And just briefly, he mentioned peak states. So I Googled peak states and I started reading about it. And I could see that the work that Grant was doing was profound work. I had
Good
also...
way to put it.
Yeah, really. I mean, I'd studied a lot of the people that he talked about in his research. I had studied that work, you know, especially a lot of Stanislav Grof's work, and looking into, I had already studied a lot about birth trauma because birth was something that was very interesting to me for many, many years. So I had studied quite a bit about birth trauma and the effects of birth trauma, and that led me into studying a lot of Stanislav Grof's work and holotropic breathing and a lot of the work that was being done to unravel trauma. Because I had done a lot of work with trauma in emotional healing work with people who have had trauma, and many of the times it went back to early childhood, went back to birth, and also went back into ancestral experiences that had created the patterns in the life of the individual that I was working with. So I had my own personal experience with those kinds of incidences of tracking or tracing or following the roots of trauma. And so when I was listening to some of the work that Grant has put out there, he had a video on YouTube and several of his books, which I purchased, and started to really study his idea from the work that he had done in following trauma all the way back in utero, all the way back to conception, and then into the DNA structures that reside in the cell where memory is stored, where the trauma is actually stored. So I was fascinated by his work because I had, again, researched diligently for many, many years with a lot of the very advanced work that was being done with trauma. So when I had listened to his work, it really made sense to me in a level that I was very, very familiar with. So I eventually called Grant and talked to him briefly and mentioned him that I would like to get some work done with him. And he mentioned Karen, who had studied with him, and he introduced me to Karen. So I finally contacted Karen, and I could feel from our first conversation that she was sensitive enough and had the background where she could really help me. And my work starting with Karen, little did she know how complex the work would be. And I so appreciate what she was willing to do to assist me in the process, because I have also done a lot of ancestral healing. For people who don't really believe it or understand it, you know, ancestral healing is actually quite simple, to where DNA just doesn't hold the memory of what we look like. It actually holds the memory of everything that our ancestors have experienced, just like everything we experience neurologically gets encoded into the DNA, just like a memory chip in a computer. It's all very similar. So their behavior is actually encoded into us. And so my interest in doing ancestral healing happened organically. It wasn't something that I had an interest in before I started doing it. It just started happening. And many of the clients that I worked with, it naturally led into those avenues. Again, it wasn't something I was looking for. And it was really interesting to read about Grant's story, where he also, it was a journey that he just started taking because of what happened to him. And the more he studied and the more interested he was in finding the roots of his own experience and healing that when it comes to different states of consciousness, and what he was willing to do and able to do and started to do in actually studying what happens to us on the inside that influences our outer experience and our internal subjective experiences. So in working with Karen, it was really, it was quite an experience for both of us, because we, you know, I had a background in doing this kind of healing work, and Karen was sensitive enough to, and you know, present enough to be able to follow the I'll call them interferences of trauma, to where the roots were. And it was a very profound and deep journey into, you know, it's not so easy to understand or explain to somebody who hasn't had the experience, of course. But when you go into an internal memory where you may meet your ancestors, let's say, which many of the indigenous cultures believe that our ancestors live inside of us. And if you really do understand how DNA works, it actually makes quite a lot of sense that not only do they live in us chemically or, you know, through the DNA molecule, but just like a memory chip in a computer is a little piece of metal, but it holds the memory of the video that you just took. It's very much like that you go into a movie or video, which is multisensorily. You can have all your senses, you can have all your feelings, and you can go feel your ancestors, and you can feel where they were traumatized, and you can actually help them heal that trauma. And that's what Karen was really, and I did, is we went into these memories with her guidance. And you know, it's like, I would say to people, it's like a dream. You know, when you wake up for a dream and you know you had the dream and you were in the dream and you experienced the dream with all your senses, and you wake up to try to express the dream to someone, that's not always so easy.
Yeah.
Because you just watched a whole movie and you've experienced the whole emotional involvement in the dream, which was totally real to you, which was absolutely there and you were in it, but you can't prove it to anybody.
Right, right.
You know?
So how I mean, it sounds like it was a good experience working with Karen. How long did it take to get through the entire protocol and the process?
Well, again, that was an experience. I don't think Karen and I were aware of how long it actually would take. But I would say because of my history, my injury history especially, again, to understand the process of something called unwinding or healing, there are all these different layers of injury because each one has a time and each one compounds the next one. So this one leads into this one, into this one. And it was the same way going into the ancestral healing work. We went and I would meet an ancestor and we would do healing with that one. And then the next session, there was another ancestor or two or three to heal. So overall, the process took several months.
And several months.
Yeah, well, once a week or, over several months.
Right, right.
Yes. Can I just make a comment on that? Yeah,
absolutely.
That Maika had a lot of injury, a lot of damage. I mean, I think you'd agree with that, that's been sort of compounded, I think, by how many injuries you've had and your back injury. And that obviously I've worked with other clients with the process where it's taken, like sort of 3 weeks sort of in comparison. And I'd like to just, I really thank you really, Maika, for hanging in there with me, because it was, a long process. And, and what you said, you describe it beautifully. It was like unlayering all the layers. But for me, it was like, wow, if this process works with somebody like you who has had so many brain injuries, and that I know that the injury, some of it was really quite damaged, that I'm just really blown away actually by the way you're talking in this interview and the way you are, and because obviously this is the first time you've met Maika, and I can just see such a difference. Anyway, carry on. You're just blowing me away. You're blowing me away.
I want to get back to that a little bit later, but the thing I want to say is you're saying it's taken several months to do this. However, again, as a conventional doctor, and as Maika, you pointed out, we don't have anything. So it was 12 years that really nothing happened.
Yeah.
So a couple months.
It's phenomenal. Honestly, it's blowing me away. Yeah.
Yeah. Compared to some other people that maybe it takes a couple of weeks. All right. That's a long time.
Yeah.
But really, in the whole realm of healing traumatic brain injury, and even if we are doing it, we're talking years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
So a couple of months.
It is short. Yeah.
Not that long.
Absolutely.
So I want to dive just a little bit deeper. You've already talked about the wonderful things about working with Karen and the things you liked about it. Were there any particular challenges or things that you wished were different in retrospect? Again, diving in, not knowing what you both were getting into.
Well, let me just say on the last subject, I say that it took that long, and because I really want to give people who are unfamiliar with this kind of process and the level of healing that takes place, like you actually get to renew yourself. You actually become the person that you're capable of being,
exactly.
Which get used to being their traumatized self, which is very limited, and the idea that it's worth taking the time, however long it takes for you. Like, I know I'm a very serious case and I've had a lot of injuries. When you talk about somebody who's had birth trauma and, been traumatized, been sexually abused, where somebody has a lot of trauma and they really don't feel that there is any way to help them, and the only way is to take drugs that will stop them from feeling horrible, that this is actually a tool that if you stay with it to get to those root causes of healing, that you can find a different way to experience life that's worth it. You know, I stayed with it because I could feel that Karen knew what she was doing.
Mm.
And the training that she had was there to be able to know when you're complete, and you will feel it. It's a reciprocal kind of experience that you will start to feel changes. And I would say in that, you know, some of the difficulties were, for me, as I've had clients work with, when you do go into these areas of trauma, when you do remember trauma, or you start to go into the ancestral memories that are stuck inside your body, and you release these energies, there are times when that doesn't feel so good. And that doesn't mean the healing isn't working. It actually means you are in a healing process. And there's quite a bit of research on what that actually looks like. When you know, because again, people have these concepts that, well, I'm going to go and tomorrow I'm going to feel completely wonderful. Well, you are going to get to feeling completely wonderful, but stay there in the process and stay with somebody who can guide you. Because, you know, I think it's Rumi, there's an old saying that it'll take 200 years to take a journey that takes 3 days if you don't have somebody to guide you.
I love that. I love that. Yes.
Yeah, that's really what Karen and what Grant are doing. You know, when I talked to Grant, I was saying, you know, I do extensive research and I've never found you before. What would it take for you to get out there more? You know, and I understand what he's experienced, where it's been a difficult process learning how to do this.
Right.
So there are difficult phases of the healing. I don't want to paint this picture that, you know, everything is just rosy and wonderful, because people don't know what it's like to go through these experiences.
Process.
They
just
need help to understand it.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate that point. I think it's a very good one that both of you are making, that it takes as long as it takes.
Exactly.
Start with somebody, you don't know what those roots are or what you might uncover. And so I really like the message that you're sending, Maika, as far as staying true to the process and staying with the process and trusting the process. And there's no sense of, oh, this should only take this amount of time.
Yeah.
If you are following the process, and the goal is, as you say, to get that client to uncover their potential and kind of heal and release all that trauma that's basically holding them back from living their birthright, that's just going to take as long as it takes. So I really appreciate that message.
Yep.
Now, the point I want to get to is where we've been sort of leading up to, which is, since finishing this process and sticking with it and working with this teamwork with Karen, utilizing, you know, all of Grant's wonderful teachings, what is different for you? How is life now for you, Maika?
Well, there's a lot of things going on in my life now that are dramatic changes, actually.
Tell us.
Well, first, I'll tell you a lot of, for me, in the past, especially after the injury, for many years after that, it really felt like my life was over, like I had just really given up. It was hard enough for me to function every day and to wake up in the morning and have to do another day. That was really challenging. At about 3 years ago, I met my new wife, and we have had a child, and my new child is 2 years old. And it was an extreme motivation. Let me say.
Yeah, that is.
To get help. You know, I had been looking, I didn't have the financial resources to get much help, but I was getting some help when I could, and working exchanges with people to get healing work done, and had quite a bit of help in that way. But the idea of bringing a child in and recognizing what, you know, I'm her father. I need to be there for her as best as I can. So actually, it was shortly after that I found peak states.
When the student's ready, the teacher appears, huh?
You know, these old sayings actually are quite pertinent, right?
Right on target.
so it was very motivating for me to do the work, even though it was challenging. And so the idea of, again, it's so difficult to explain to someone. You know, I know what it's like to have a good brain. I remember that somewhere back there in the memory. And I realized I wasn't that person anymore. And I wanted to be that person. You know, I want to be able to help people also. And the idea of having a child, and we had her right here in our yard by the ocean. We had a natural birth because, again, I had studied a lot about birth and birth trauma, and my wife was right there. So we had actually done a lot of healing work with, my wife did a lot of healing work with her ancestry and her birth trauma. And we had a beautiful birth, 3 hours of labor here in the yard. And so that kind of experience was so deeply touching to my heart that it motivated me to do the work. And so, again, explaining to someone what it's like, you know, if you could explain drinking a pint of gin, what that felt like after you finished the pint, and what it was like to be in that state of mind, and then wake up the next day with the residual effect of that hangover, and then by the middle of the day feel back to your old self. It's kind of like that. You know, you lose your ability to function properly. You live in this idea where your brain just doesn't work anymore. You may act like a fool. You may not be able to remember where you are, or who you are, or anything like that. And then the next day you're kind of normal again. So the idea is, as we were doing this work, I started to get inspired more with what I was feeling. I was able to remember better. I was able to process emotion better. At first, my wife and I had a lot of emotional difficulties, and I attribute that to my inability emotionally to be able to connect, to be able to interface emotionally like I felt I wanted to, but I couldn't. You know, and I wasn't as present. I would forget things and all kinds of things, which was irritating to her, which was irritating to me. So it was a very difficult and challenging process. And again, for what I've read about, especially families and spouses of people who have had brain injuries, it's a very difficult experience. So I had experienced all of that. And so after doing the work with Karen, or actually during the process, things started to change for me.
Yeah.
Not only did they change internally, but I started to get more motivated to do things in my outside world. And so since the work with Karen, I've started a business called Be Soul Inspired, with the first legal business that I've created, which, you know, I actually created a whole business and did all the paperwork and did all these things to create this business. Right now I'm moving to Germany with my wife because there's a course she wants to take there in the next year and a half. And that would have been unthinkable to me, that I would actually get up and leave from where I am to go into a new environment, because it will be it'll also be very challenging. I don't speak German. 6 months ago, before meeting Karen, my wife would speak to me in German, and it just didn't make any sense. My brain couldn't process it. And I had no hope that I would learn any German. So since then, I've been studying German on the internet and learning to count in German. And, you know, I mean, it's really been a dramatic shift that slowly is changing my ability to interact in the world again, you know? And so to explain all the aspects of that, it's, for me, as you can see, there's a little bit of excitement there.
Yeah, a lot of excitement.
A lot of excitement.
Yeah, let's go to Maika.
Yeah, can I just...
Oh, yeah.
I mean, as Maika said, we've been meeting for the past, 3 months, maybe longer than that, because we've had, I've had holidays, you've had holidays, we've had breaks in between. But here you are now, is the person that, you know, when we first met and had that exchange, that I could see, you know, I could see this really intelligent, lively person that was there but wasn't there. And that, you know, I'm remembering that first conversation we had, you know, and I'm looking at you now and how different you are. And I've never seen you like this because, you know, as I said, it's been a gradual process over that time. And every time we check in and I'd say, oh, how's your logical mind connecting? Oh, well, I'm still having problems with that. And even till the last conversation we had,
Yep.
which was maybe 3 weeks ago or a month, because I've been away on holiday for a good 2 weeks and we've not been able to catch up. And just listening to you, just explaining things and just grasping things from your mind, you know, all the knowledge that you know. Like, I've never seen you speak like this, and I am absolutely, totally touched by it and blown away, because you are the person that I knew was in there. I kept asking every week, how is you connected to? And it wasn't quite there. And it's like, wow. You know, honestly, I am totally touched and blown. Like,
Wow. Well,
really worth the effort.
Yeah.
So fabulous.
You definitely put a lot
Really
of effort.
worth it, honestly.
You put a lot of effort into it, and I am deeply touched and deeply appreciated.
I was determined to get to the end point.
Well, again, it's the same thing. The conversations I had with Karen when we first met, you know, I could be in the middle of a sentence and forget what I was saying and not be able to express what I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. And again, there's so much stuff out there on the internet where people just make stuff up. You never know who to believe. And I wish we would have had some of it on tape to show the difference.
Yeah, so do I. I just totally, honestly, totally, I really can't believe it, honestly. Because I could see you slowly, things coming together. You know, I could see the shifts in you. But each time I checked in, you were still really struggling to connect all your cognitive abilities. And this is the first time I've seen you really being able to do that. And
well, again, it's to help people understand that a process like this, like Karen said to me, you know, be aware after we really had finished and we were having a talk. She said, you know, be aware that you're not the same person as you were when you were traumatized. I'm paraphrasing. That, you know, don't get stuck in who you were. And really that touched me, because I could see I was still, you know, because in my experience, I was trying to be safe in the last 11 years. Like, I need to just be safe. I can't really go out in the world too much because I can't remember what I'm saying, you know, because I did public speaking, and now I could just be in the middle of talking and I just forget what I'm saying. And so I actually was scared to go out there because I couldn't remember, and I couldn't, you know, all the research that I've done, it's in there, but I couldn't access it. So it was
I remember.
You remember? I mean,
that was the last conversation we had, because I said to you, you're clear. We have finished the process. Everything works. You need to act. I remember that conversation. I was like, you need to live this now and be it, because it all works. Yeah, I remember. So you obviously took it on board. That was the last conversation we had. Yeah, that's right.
It was. Because again, you know, I've had a lot of my stuff in storage. I really haven't. There's been a lot of baggage that I've kind of not been able to process, which means moving it and clearing things and doing new things. And so it took some initiative and motivation. And that conversation really made me realize that a part of me was still afraid to move forward. But I did feel like I had the ability to move forward.
Yeah.
So I started
Absol-
to more and more.
Yeah.
So again, that's another process that it's important for people to understand, that when you do go through the process, we do, we are humans, we are creatures of habit. And if the habit was that we're damaged or that we're broken or we can't function, and we're so used to that, that even when we're not, we stay in that place, that, it's okay to just start moving in a new direction. And that also sometimes needs some coaching and some help. So it's okay to get follow-up work, as Karen has talked about. We've talked a few times after, just so she could be there to support me, which I really appreciate how, caring an individual is, like Karen, that she really wants to see you move into a new life. She's got the skills, the tools, and the heart, which I think is the most important thing for a healer, is to have the heart there. It's not just something where you do it to make money, or, you get into a routine where it's just a job. It's actually, you still maintain your heart to make sure. It's like having a child, which I'm learning more and more about every day. Your heart has to be there. It's not about teaching the child the way you were taught. It's about going into their world and keeping your heart open for them to learn, and that's really a part of, I don't know if you've read The Magical Child, which is Joseph Childer Pierce's work, who did a lot of work with the triune brain in understanding that a baby's brain in an evolutionary biological process is really, its role is to study everything multisensorially. They need to put everything in their mouth. They need to study everything in their environment. And one of the things he says in the book is that join their world. Instead of imposing your world on them, join their world. And it's really been interesting, because going through this process with Karen and going through my own internal process, I really took that to heart. And I'm learning with her. Like, I'm learning how to be a new person. I'm learning how to teach my brain to function in a new way, because it has the ability. All the neurons are starting to connect again. But I need to create some new synapses, which is all a part of what is being discovered in science and neuroplasticity, is that we can do that. In psychology, it was believed that once our main networks are locked in the midbrain, that we can't change it, And they're learning now in neuroplasticity is, yes, you can, but you have to change your behavior. You have to change the way you think. And so I've been joining my daughter as her brain is just kind of coming online. I go there with her and go, I can learn new things too. I can learn German. I can do this. And so, yeah, it's again, to have this conversation 4 or 5 months ago, this is not the conversation that I would have had with you. So
It wouldn't have happened. No.
Yeah, it's really fabulous to listen to the two of you. And it's almost like, Maika, you were in jail and the door was locked. And then through the process, the door actually was open, and you're like, whoa, I don't know, I'm used to being in jail. Do I actually want to go out and actually walk outside the jail? So that's really amazing. And then your process of using your daughter and getting back into that childlike curiosity. And I'll often tell my coaching clients when they're working on things, I want you to, feel into that and have that childlike curiosity and just open and experience it. I do want to go back just a little bit to when we were talking about what's different and kind of go through a couple different areas. So from a physical standpoint, you said at the beginning you were having a lot of fatigue and were having different physical problems. Has that shifted at all for you, Maika?
it has, yeah. And one of the, especially, I didn't mention it, but there was always a mild headache.
Mm-hmm.
And that, again, you get so used to it that this is just the way my life is. And so to all of a sudden not have it there and to realize, wow, I don't have a headache every day anymore. Or I can do more. I can ride a bicycle. I can do these things. Because again, it is, there is a memory that I couldn't do all those things.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of not going out more is the memory that says, oh, you can't do those things.
Right.
So yes, it's like being in jail and all of a sudden you step out and say, oh, can I really do that?
Yeah.
So, so again, symptomology is, one of them is talking. One of them is the emotional content, which we don't talk a lot about in our society. The idea that emotionally I was very stunted.
Okay. That was my next thing, emotionally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And but differentiating that between physical symptomology and emotional symptomology, where in reality they're kind of part of the same dance, I mean, from the physical, like I said, if let's say I have a headache today, emotionally I'm going to be grumpy. I'm going to be, it's not so much fun to have a headache, so I'm not going to be as much fun. I'm not going to be as much interactive because my head hurts, or my neck hurts. Or I can't remember something. And so a lot of those kinds of things.
Is the fatigue better?
The fatigue is actually a lot better. Again, I've had a lot of different type of work with the fatigue. Some things have helped a little bit. The fatigue is, I would say, so much better. I'm able to get up earlier in the morning, and I was having a lot of sleep problems, which, for the past 11 years again. So if I'm getting 4 hours of sleep of night, I'm waking up, I got a headache, I'm groggy.
Right.
Not going to be very, very much fun. And so the idea that I started to sleep a little better, I still have some on and off days, but I noticed there's a big difference in how I experience that and how my body has more energy. And so I can feel that, like Karen said, at some point at the end stage, she could see with her X-ray vision, because she does have X-ray vision. She could see with her third eye, however you want to make that out to be, right? That she can see energetically that, hey, things are clear. You actually have the ability to function properly. And I actually do have to remind myself of that sometimes, to say, hey, I'm not stuck back there.
Yeah.
I can go out and do this. And so, but it's learning how to do it. And luckily I do have my daughter where she is. She's not familiar with an area. She'll kind of hold back. She'll assess everything and take a little while to go out and play. Yeah. And I look at my process is so similar to hers. My brain is just learning how to do things again.
Yeah, it's fabulous. So you've really gone over the physical changes, the emotional changes, the cognitive changes. And I never met you before, but certainly showing up, you just have this immense fountain of knowledge. And I'm like, okay, we got to stay in touch. We're going to have more conversations.
Yeah,
which is fabulous. And then seeing Karen's reaction is like, whoa, where did this guy come from?
Well, again, a lot of the time I was doing research, but it was all going into the hard drive. Right. And there was nothing to access the outcome of the hard drive. It was all going in. And
are you noticing that research that you've done over the years, it's now accessible to you? Are you able to pull those out?
So much more accessible.
Accessible.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
great.
And it feels like I can have a conversation where I don't feel scared about having a conversation because, again, it's such an internally strange experience to go, hey, yeah, and I remember, stop.
That was your expression. That was it. That was the very expression. Yeah, that was it.
In the middle of a conversation, just go blank.
Yeah.
Well, then I don't even want to open my mouth. I really don't want to talk because it seems it's an awkward kind of a feeling.
Yeah. Are you thinking public speaking might be back in your future again?
Yeah, I feel, it's something that I planned on doing 30 years ago. And really from the back injury, which was very traumatic and very painful, it really took the sail out of my wind, or took the winds out of my sail, I would say, where that kind of pain, to be able to relate to people who are in pain, whether it's emotional, psychological, or physical, from my own experiences, I realize how difficult it is for people to reach out for help, number one. And really the idea of what society offers for illness or ill health or psychological problems or emotional problems or trauma is not only so limited, but it's in the wrong direction. That there are people like yourself and Karen and Grant and others who are out there who are doing really, really good and helpful work. And so for me, I want to help people to realize that there are people who can help them.
Awesome.
You know, there are things that we can do that can help not only just us as individuals, but help our families and our social structures and everything.
So what would you say, Maika, to someone out there who may be listening to this who's struggling with TBI, or maybe someone who knows someone who has traumatic brain injury symptoms? What would you say to them?
I would say, you know, the idea that Max Planck, you know, we'll go like big, okay? Max Planck,
Physics.
who is really considered to be the founding father of physics. In all his research with the minute particles of atoms and atomic structures and studying how they interact and how they work, ultimately, in this genius of a mind, he realized and shared in his work and his writings that what he believed is that the whole thing is one big mind, and that it's an interactive mind. Like the mind called life feels our mind, and what we put into it is what we get back. Like it responds, and that's what they found out in the research in physics. And physics is really the study of the energy underneath the matter of life, right? How energy makes life. And so what he discovered is that what we think goes into the field and returns to us in a like way. Like what we believe, you know, there's a lot of new age kind of things, the law of attraction and what you believe comes back to you. I would say for people who have multiple brain injuries or any kind of problem that they're working with, is that what you think is so important. So if you believe there are solutions and you put your intention to find solutions for yourself, that you will find people to help you. And right here, if you're listening to this talk, there's two wonderful people right here who can help you, and reach out to them. You know, reach out to the people that are there offering their help, because there's a lot of people out there, and there's a lot of charlatans in the natural healing industry, as there is in any other industry. There really are. But that doesn't mean that there aren't really good people, because there's a lot of really good people. And so if you've been in pain and you've tried the medical model and you've tried all kinds of different things, never give up hope, I would say. You know, always, because it's that hope inside of us that ultimately something will come along and light a little spark in that hope, and it'll turn into a flame, and then that flame will kind of light the path for you to find what you're looking for, to find the help that you seek. And because oftentimes for people that have had a lot of problems, who've been wounded with trauma, because we don't realize that what happened to us as children oftentimes in our culture is very traumatic, it's very wounding. And if they believe because of their experiences, especially when they're young, that they can't get what they need, you know, all this is tied into a very deep psycho-emotional patterns that we have. If that happened to you, there's still a way to overcome that. And that really is with your mind, with your intention. Like really ask God, creator, whatever you believe is out there, even if you don't believe there's anything, ask the wind for help and follow your inner guidance. And really that's what led me to Grant. You know, as I was looking and looking, I really need help with this, and looking and studying and doing all this stuff and researching. And one person said a little thing about peak states. And I went, that sounds interesting. Like that's where he got some of his information. Well, I want it where he got it. And so I Googled it and came across Grant's work, and then talked to Grant. And again, it was so wonderful to have Grant accessible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I found his Skype name and I called him, and he answered, and we had a conversation, you know, because that's the way I am. It's like, I'm going to follow it to where it leads. And if that's where it leads, I'm going to call him. I want to talk to the person who did the research. And he, with his intuitive guidance, said, hey, call Karen.
Fabulous.
That's what took me there. Yeah.
That's what happened. What a wonderful message of hope. And one of the things I always say is healing's always possible.
It's
Yeah.
always possible,
Always
no matter
possible.
what.
No matter
Yep.
what. Yeah. Would you recommend someone who had traumatic brain injury doing this process, this protocol?
Would I recommend them to Karen in this protocol? I would absolutely say, if you're willing to really heal, and if you're willing to reach out for help, do it now. Like, do it now. Start now, and experience it for yourself.
Perfect. Perfect. Anything else you want to share with us? You've been so open and giving, and I really appreciate the time and your willingness to share your life and your journey, and hopefully help others who try to understand, if they don't have TBI, what that's like. And for people out there that maybe are having similar challenges with TBI, to feel you as a kindred spirit, and giving them and say, there is hope. It is possible. If I could change, you can change. Anything else you want to share with people?
Well, I just want to, first of all, again, thank Karen for the gift that she had offered to me, because it really was a gift for me that she was willing to stay there. Because again, what she was able to see in her training, like, okay, that's not clear. We need to do another session. And instead of recognizing like, hey, she wants more money out of me or whatever like that, because that wasn't the case at all. No. The reality is that she was clear enough to see that, hey, there's some areas there that still need some help. And when it was done, she was clear, and that's it. Okay, you're ready to go now. Now, I don't need to be there to hold your hand. You're ready. Now go out there and come on. And again, I, correlated to my daughter, like, hey, yes, you can go out there and do that. You're safe. I'm right here. I'm watching, but you can go do it yourself. And so I want to thank Karen especially for that. I want to thank you for, even though first time I've met you, I want to thank you for being willing and inspired to do this kind of work and to talk to me here today and put it out into the world, what I have to share through your network. And I think there's so much hope for not only people with TBI, but for us as humans to find a better way to live. And in that, we have to be able to access our potential, and our potential starts with our biological functioning, right? We have to be able to function biologically, neurologically. We have to have some semblance of health and the energy to do it. And in doing that, then we can help our friends and our neighbors and our family. And, because a lot of people, especially with TBI, share that common experience with other people, whether they, meet them in the doctor's office or whatever. And that's what spreads it, like spreading seeds of hope and possibility. And that's really what I would like to share, is that we need to help that, because in true reality, a lot of us are wounded. We might not have specific brain injuries, although a lot of people have traumatic brain injuries from birth and they don't even know it. But if you're not able to function and feel the joy and happiness of life, there's kind of the possibility that maybe you have something that isn't functioning properly biologically, where, in psychology say, oh, it's all in your mind. Well, yeah, it's in your mind. It's in your brain. And let's correct your brain. Let's fix your brain. And you might actually have a different emotional experience or a psychological experience. So it's not just, again, the category of somebody who's been diagnosed with TBI, but if somebody's listening to this and they're not happy, because happiness is a neurological, biological experience too, hormonal experience. Yeah. And so, be willing to just reach out and help. If you're not happy, find ways to be happy by reaching out to people who can help. So I want to just really thank you both for being who you are, and wish you well on your journey.
Awesome. Karen, do you want to add any last words?
I just wanted to thank you, Maika, for really hanging in the journey, because I know parts of it have been challenging, and for trusting me really as well when, when we're in those places and it hurts and it's painful. I'm saying, trust me, we'll come out the other end. I promise you. I know we will. We just need to carry on. And for you really trusting me with that and hanging on in there with the process and seeing the process through, that means, a lot to me, that you you know, you'd show up, you know, every week when we had those Skype calls scheduled, and, you know, willing, most weeks, yeah, willing to go through that and face that, you know, in yourself, because I think, you know, you need to give yourself a lot of credit for that, because I've been here to, you know, guide you through the process, but you have actually, you know, done the work. Without you doing the work, then, you know, it doesn't actually happen. And I think that that's important. Anyone, as you said, anyone listening, I think that people who work with this process, you need to be ready and willing to make those changes. As what you said, you were really motivated, you wanted to change, and you put a lot of effort into the process that we did when we worked together. So I'm wanting to really thank you for that, and I'm still really, really shocked just listening to you and I'm just so absolutely thrilled for you as well, because this is who I saw that you really were when I first met you. And I've been waiting all these months. I've been waiting for this to happen.
Well, I'm glad you created this interview to see it. Really, that's, you know, it means a lot to me, because again,
yeah, it means a lot to me. Yeah, obviously it was you know, it was the right time.
The reality was that I missed several appointments because I forgot that I had them, you know, and so thank you for sticking in there with me, because again, you know, a lot of people can't understand, especially with brain injury like that, is I just forgot I had the appointment.
Yeah.
You know, and so Karen stuck in there with me, and as
I
far
wasn't giving up on you.
You know, so, you know, if you have the opportunity to work with Karen, I would highly, highly recommend her. So I want to thank you, Karen, and wish you the best. And I know you're going to touch and help a lot of people. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Maika. Thank you, Karen, for being here. Wonderful testimonial to what's possible. So there is hope. Healing is always possible.
Yep.
Takes a lot of teamwork on the person doing the healing or needing the healing, and on the people guiding them. But it's always possible. Go out there, and I look forward to continuing to work with you, Karen, and Maika. If you're up for it, we're going to stay in touch, buddy. I'm expecting great things from you. So next time, but I don't know German, so even if you can start talking to me in German, I'm out of luck. So, all right, we'll sign off now, and thank you to both of you.
Thank you very much. Many blessings.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.